He didn't disappear. He left. And the difference matters more than you'd think. On October 14th, 2019, Dominic Farrell arrived at the office he'd built from nothing, literally from nothing, from a rented desk in a shared space in Clifton with a second-hand drawing board and a client list of 3, and found his name had been removed from the door. Not the sign. The door itself had been repainted overnight, a clean matte gray, and the brass letters that used to read Farrell and Vane now read only Vane Studio. He stood on Pembroke Road for 4 minutes. I know it was 4 minutes because the CCTV footage from the cafe across the street still existed when I started looking into this, and I watched it 11 times. For minutes. Then he walked in anyway. What happened in the 47 days before that morning is what I couldn't stop thinking about. A 23-year partnership. 2 men who had, by every account I gathered, genuinely trusted each other. And somewhere in those 47 days, one of them had decided the other was done. Dominic Farrell wasn't naive. I want to be clear about that, because the easy version of this story makes him the fool. The trusting partner who didn't read the fine print, who signed without lawyers, who believe in handshakes. That version is comfortable because it gives you a place to put the blame. Dominic's fault for being soft. But when you actually look at the documents, and I spent 6 weeks in a records office in Bristol going through filings and correspondence. What you find is more unsettling. He read everything. He queried the clauses. He had a solicitor review the 2017 restructuring agreement. He asked the right questions. He just got wrong answers. Marcus Vane had founded the firm with Dominic in 1996. They'd met at the Bartlett, argued constantly about load-bearing aesthetics versus visual flow, and decided that was exactly why they should work together. For 23 years they did. Farrell and Vane had 41 employees by 2018. They'd won regional commissions, a national prize for a public library in Cardiff, a shortlist for a hospital extension in line. Not glamorous, solid, the kind of firm that lasts. The restructuring in 2017 was Marcus's idea. Dominic told me this himself when I finally reached him. He'd moved to Dundee by then, which is its own kind of answer. Marcus had presented it as a tax efficiency play. Simplify the partnership structure, consolidate the IP under a single holding company, reduce personal liability. Dominic had asked the solicitor. The solicitor had reviewed it. Everyone said it was standard. What nobody flagged, or what somebody chose not to flag, was a clause on page 9 of the amended partnership deed. Clause 14C. It gave either partner the right to trigger a buyout at a pre-agreed valuation with 30 days' notice without requiring the other party's consent. The valuation had been fixed in 2017 at a figure that, by October 2019, was roughly 34% below the firm's actual market worth. Maybe I'm wrong about whether that was intentional. Maybe Marcus genuinely believed in 2017 that the figure was fair. But here's the thing. He'd had the firm independently valued in March 2019. Internally, without telling Dominic, I found a valuation report. It put the firm at £2.3 million. The buyout clause was pegged at £1.4 million. He had 7 months to decide what to do with that gap. He waited. Then he triggered the clause on September 6, 2019. Dominic had 30 days. Maybe you think that's where the story gets hard to follow. The legal architecture, the clauses, the numbers. But that's not what kept me coming back to it. What kept me coming back was something much smaller. A detail that doesn't fit. On the morning of September 7th, the day after Marcus filed the notice, Dominic sent him an email. I have a copy. 9 sentences. No anger. No threat. He wrote, I assume there's been a mistake. Call me when you can. He signed it Dom, which was what he always called himself in internal emails. Not Dominic. Dom. The way you sign an email to someone you've known for 23 years. Marcus did not reply. Not that day. Not the next. Not in the 30-day notice period. Not once. I don't know if he ever read it. And somehow that uncertainty, that specific silence, is what I find impossible to let go of. Dominic told me he checked his sent folder 3 times that week to make sure it had actually sent. It had. Marcus opened it at 9:47 a.m. on September 7th, according to the read receipt that Dominic had turned on by default for all outgoing mail. He opened it. He read it. He closed it and said nothing for 47 days. Now, and you need to hold on here because what comes next changes the shape of everything I just told you. In December 2019, a former Farrell and Vane Jr. associate named Priya Nanthakumar agreed to meet me for coffee in Redland. She'd left the firm 3 months before the buyout, voluntarily, she said, for a position in Edinburgh. What she told me, speaking slowly, in the way people speak when they've been deciding whether to say something for a long time, was this. Marcus Vane had spoken to her in June 2019. He'd told her the firm was changing direction. He'd told her that her role would be restructured. He'd advised her to find something else before the autumn. She had assumed it was budget pressure. It was only later, when she heard what happened to Dominic, that she understood what she'd been told. He'd been planning it since at least June, maybe earlier. The March valuation report suggested earlier. Dominic had known nothing. But here's the part that I had completely wrong until that December meeting. Dominic had known. For 11 months. He told me this when I pressed him on a detail in the 2017 restructuring documents. A handwritten note in the margin of his personal copy that read check clause 14 again with a date, November 2018. He noticed something was off. He meant to go back to it. Life had continued. He trusted that Marcus would flag it if it became relevant. That note sat in his desk for 11 months while Marcus prepared, filed, painted over his name on the door. I don't know what to do with that. I genuinely don't. Because it changes the story from a clean betrayal, villain and victim, knife and back, into something much harder to look at directly. A man who saw the edge coming and chose not to look down. That's not weakness. I don't think it's weakness. But I also can't tell you it was just an oversight. I need to tell you about 3 other cases because Dominic Farrell's story is not unique. That's possibly the part that should concern you most. In Ghent, in 2016, a woman named Sylvie Oosterlink spent 17 years building a textile distribution company with her brother-in-law, Peter Vrox. When the firm hit £4.1 million in annual revenue, Peter filed a restructuring notice that transferred 51% of the company's operational assets to a holding company he'd incorporated 9 months earlier. Sylvie's name was on the original company. It was not on the holding company. The legal vehicle was airtight. She got a settlement of £340,000. She told Belgian financial press, "The contract always said this could happen. I just never thought he would." In Osaka, in 2021, a software engineer named Kenji Harada discovered that his co-founder, Tomohiro Shida, had been issuing himself additional share options for 22 months through a clause in their shareholder agreement that neither of them had discussed since they'd signed it in 2017. By the time Kenji noticed, Shida owned 61% of a company they'd built equally. Kenji had signed a document without rereading it in full. He told me he remembered the signing clearly. They'd done it over lunch, laughing about something, and he trusted that nothing had changed from the draft he'd reviewed. One clause had changed, Clause 7b, for words had been modified. He'd missed it. And in Christchurch, in 2018, an events management company called Aldridge and Pratt dissolved in the space of 4 days. Claire Aldridge arrived at work one Tuesday to find that her business partner, Raymond Pratt, had transferred the company's primary client contracts to a new entity he'd registered in Auckland. 43 clients, 11 employees. For days, Claire had been on holiday in Corsica. The contracts contained a transfer clause she said she'd never seen before in a version of the client agreement that differed from the draft she'd approved. Nobody could subsequently produce the original draft. Somebody had replaced it on a share drive. What connects these 4 stories, Dominic Farrell, Sylvie Oosterlink, Kenji Harada, Claire Aldridge, isn't malice in isolation. It's patience. In every case, the betrayal had been prepared for months before it was executed. In every case, the legal mechanism had been inserted quietly into a document that both parties signed. In every case, the person who was betrayed had, at some point, trusted that a detail didn't need checking because the relationship was solid. And maybe you've signed something recently without reading every clause. Maybe you have a partnership agreement, a shareholder document, a co-ownership deed sitting in a drawer. Maybe you've never opened it since the day you signed it. I'm not saying anything specific about your situation. I'm saying I now read everything. Every word, every subclause, every numbered paragraph. That started in December 2019 in a coffee shop in Redland, when Priya Nanthakumar told me what Marcus Vane had said to her in June. The rational explanation, the one I tried to hold on to for the first few months of reporting, is that this is simply what happens when business interests diverge and one party acts within the legal framework available to them. Marcus Vane did nothing illegal. Every solicitor I spoke to confirmed this. Clause 14C was valid. The notice period was honored. The buyout sum, though below market value, was contractually binding. From a purely legal standpoint, Marcus Vane bought out his partner at the agreed price using the agreed mechanism. The problem is that this explanation only functions if you accept that the relationship between two people who'd worked together for 23 years was equivalent to the relationship between two strangers in a transaction. And for a while I tried to accept that. I told myself that partnerships are contractual structures, that sentiment is separate from law, that what Marcus did was perhaps cold, but not outside the bounds of what the agreement permitted. I interviewed a commercial litigation solicitor named Harriet Dawes-Cole in Birmingham in February 2020. She's handled 31 partnership dissolution cases in 14 years. She told me, without referring to the specific case, that the clauses most frequently used in hostile buyouts are almost always the ones that seemed least threatening when they were signed. Her exact words were, "People sign the clause that will destroy them because on the day they sign it, they cannot imagine the person across the table would ever use it that way." She paused after she said it. I wrote it down immediately because it felt like the most honest thing anyone had said to me about any of this. Then she added, "And sometimes the person across the table couldn't imagine it either." At the time, that last sentence is the one I keep returning to. Because maybe Marcus Vane signed that clause in 2017 with no particular plan. Maybe the plan came later. In March 2019, when the valuation report landed on his desk and the arithmetic became impossible to ignore. I don't know at what point a person decides. I'm not sure anyone does. But somewhere between 2017 and September 6th, 2019, he decided. And then he attended the anniversary dinner and brought wine. Then I spoke to Dominic's daughter, Rosie Farrell, who was 24 in 2019 and had done her first work experience placement at Farrell & Vane when she was 17. She told me that Marcus Vane had attended her parents' anniversary dinner that August, 6 weeks after the March valuation, 10 weeks before the buyout notice. He'd brought wine. He'd given a toast. He'd said, in front of 14 people, that Dominic was the best partner he'd ever had. That was August 11th, 2019. The notice arrived on September 6th. I can't hold the rational explanation and that dinner in the same thought. I've tried. You probably can for now. Try again in a week. The detail I keep coming back to, the one that maybe doesn't matter legally but refuses to leave me alone, is the USB drive. When Dominic cleared his desk on October 14th, 2019, he found in the bottom drawer a small black USB drive that wasn't his. He recognized it as one Marcus used for client presentation files, a specific brand, Corsair, with a white label on which Marcus always wrote the client name in blue felt tip. This one had no label. Dominic plugged it into his laptop before he left the office for the last time. He didn't know why. He told me, "I just wanted to know if there was something I was still missing." The drive contained 23 files. Dominic opened 4 of them before he stopped. They were correspondence, emails, meeting notes, draft legal documents, all dated between November 2018 and July 2019, all relating to the restructuring of the buyout mechanism, all involving Marcus, their shared solicitor, and a third party Dominic had never heard of, a consultancy called Northvane Advisory, registered in Jersey in October 2018. Dominic kept the drive. He gave me a copy in March 2020. I've had 3 independent technology specialists confirm its authenticity. I've also been told by 2 separate lawyers that the contents, while suggestive, are likely insufficient to reopen a legal challenge given the time elapsed and the contractual validity of the original deed. So what do you do with 23 files that tell a story you can't legally act on? I want to tell you what it felt like to sit with those files for the first time, because this is the part I've been avoiding saying out loud. It was a Thursday evening in late March 2020. The first lockdown had started 3 days earlier. I was alone in a flat in Stoke Newington, London, with a cup of tea that had gone cold and a laptop screen that was the only light in the room. I'd been reporting on Dominic's case for 4 months by then. I thought I understood the shape of it. I thought I knew what kind of story I was dealing with. I opened the first file at 9:14 p.m. An email chain between Marcus and a solicitor named Gerald Fitch. Not the shared firm solicitor, a different one, a personal appointment I hadn't known existed. Dated January 2019. The subject line was timing and exposure. I read it twice. My hands were, I noticed, very still, which is what happens to me when something is worse than I expected. The second file was a draft document, not a final version, a working draft of an amended Clause 14C. Handwritten annotations in the margins. The handwriting wasn't Marcus's. I don't know whose it was. I still don't. I closed the laptop at 11:47 p.m. I sat in the dark for a while. Not dramatic dark, just the ordinary dark of a flat where you forgot to turn a light on. And I thought about the fact that Dominic had found this drive in a drawer. That had been left there. And I still can't answer the question that has been sitting in my chest since that night. Was it left by accident? Or was it left on purpose? Was it a mistake? Marcus in a hurry, a drive slipped out of a pocket, forgotten in the chaos of the transition? Or was it something else? A door left ajar. Evidence given without ever having to admit it was given. I asked Dominic once directly. He said he'd thought about it for a long time. He said he genuinely didn't know. Then he said something I wrote down and haven't been able to put away since. Maybe Marcus wanted someone to find it. Maybe that was the only honest thing he could manage. I don't know if that's true. I can't be sure of anything about Marcus Vane's intentions. But that sentence, the only honest thing he could manage, is the one that stayed. What this case points toward. And I say points toward rather than proves, because I'm not able to prove what I think I know, is a specific kind of betrayal that leaves almost no fingerprints. Not the explosive kind, not the dramatic exit, the slow kind, the kind that is prepared for 11 months inside a legal document that both parties already signed. The kind where the betrayer attends your anniversary dinner and brings wine and says true things about you in front of people you love, and the mechanism is already in place and has been for months, and nothing he says at that dinner is technically a lie. Maybe that's the most frightening version of this. Not the lie. The truth told while the knife is already drawn. And I keep thinking about what Priya Nanthakumar said as she was leaving that coffee shop in December. She'd put on her coat, and she was almost at the door, and she turned around and said, the strangest part was that Marcus always seemed to genuinely like him. She paused. Maybe he did. Maybe you can do something like this to someone you actually like. I don't know. That's the part one can't figure out. Neither can I. I've spent 4 years on this story. I still can't figure out that part. If you can, tell me. I suspect you can't either. And that's where we are. 23 files on a USB drive in a drawer in Dundee. The valuation gap of £900,000. The question that doesn't close. Dominic Farrell is still building. The next story goes further into what was inside those files, and what one of those files says about Northvane Advisory. If the August dinner stayed with you, the wine, the toast, the 26 days, the comments are open. Subscribe. There are more stories like this one. Turn the lights off. Press play. Don't hang up. Shadow tapes.